so phenomenally. You're more like the way we rock it.
Hey, how's everybody doing today? Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Shelly and Megan. I was getting excited about the speaker coming on stage, then I realized it was me. I was like, great, I've heard all this. No, it's true, I am a scientist and a comedian, and the benefits to that is that if I'm ever giving a science talk and it doesn't make any sense, I can just tell people it was a joke. If I ever tell a joke and it's not funny, I'm gonna be like, it's because it's science. So that's all right. I am excited to be here at Women Ignite. I've never actually been able to make it to Burning Man, and I feel like this is gonna be better. My wife told me that joke might not go over, but it's about courage, right? My talk today is gonna be about bias in STEM, and I wanna talk about my feelings about that bias in STEM through the lens of my experiences as I came into the person that I am today. I grew up from a blue-collar family. Both my parents were plumbers, so I got to see the struggles that my mother had working in a male-dominated field, and especially blue-collar. Like, you don't see, I think when she was going through the plumbing apprenticeship program, she was one of 3 female plumbers in the state of Idaho at the time, which did lead to I heard a lot of discrimination against her, like told to me like at home. Like, I remember her telling a story about how her tires actually got slashed in class when she was going to night school to learn more about plumbing. So it's really pervasive in the world of blue collar. And as I grew up, I started doing comedy, and comedy is another male-dominated field. And there's so much discrimination against women in comedy, and it's blatant. So there are many comics that I know that will just straight up tell you that women just aren't funny. And I can tell you, if you want to see that hypothesis broken, please come to the WICOM comedy show tomorrow night with Shelly and Megan, putting it on in full force. And I know that they're both very funny women. I've done a show with them at the Arid Club. And if you want to talk about a tough crowd for women, that's... But they did it. They made them laugh. They're really good, and I'm excited for the show tomorrow night, too. But both blue-collar work and comedy, like, there's bias, but it's very much conscious. People are aware of it, and that's a different problem than the problem that we see in STEM fields, because in STEM, the bias is unconscious. A lot of people in STEM aren't even aware that they have a bias against women, which is sad, because history is filled with women who have contributed to very many various scientific fields. Like, there are so many stories. I don't have enough time in my 10 minutes to tell you all about them. So I'm gonna choose one very representative story. And it's the story of the discovery of DNA. And I wanna know, by round of applause, who knows who Rosalind Franklin is? Right. Who doesn't know the name Rosalind Franklin? That's okay, you can clap too. It's not a test. I'm not going to be mad at you. I'm here to tell you. That's what it's about. Watson and Crick were the scientists that got the credit for the discovery of DNA, but the work that they did, a lot of it involved discovering the structure of DNA. At the time, if you can imagine, when nobody knew what deoxyribonucleic acid was, let alone what its shape was, they were trying to find the shape of DNA. They didn't know if it was a helix, if it was a triple helix. They weren't sure about it, but Rosalind Franklin specialized in X-ray crystallography, and that technique allowed her to image DNA for the first time. And without her knowledge, Watson and Crick looked at her work and based their paper largely on it, and she didn't get any credit. Watson and Crick won the Nobel Prize, and Rosalind Franklin would have won the Nobel Prize as well if she had published her paper sooner. And that's the tragedy of the history of women in science, is there are many discoveries made by very intelligent women, but the credit is taken by men. And that's largely in part by the assumption that there's a biological difference between men and women that leads to men being better at STEM. So I did a little research into that. I wanted to see, is there actually a biological difference between men and women? And the answer is a qualified yes, there is. I mean, there's the obvious sexual differences, but there have been studies that shown that in early age childhood, boys are better at systemizing knowledge, which means examining systems and finding the underlying rules that explain what they do, and that women are better at empathizing. In fact, I saw a study, like babies that were 1 day old, like the male babies will look at a model above them, and the female babies would more likely look at a human face. But the question about that is, I mean, there might be an inherent difference in interests between the sexes, but does that mean that there's a difference in aptitude? And studies have shown that male children are better at spatial visualization, which is imagining something in your head and being able to rotate it and see how it works in 3 dimensions. And male children do seem to have a better innate sense of how to do this. But with some training, female children are just as good at doing this as the male children if they're in an environment that allows them to do it. And that's really the crux of it. And I wanted to read a quote by Neil deGrasse Tyson that is talking about the bias of women in STEM. And I looked at his quote. I liked it because he is a male trying to understand the bias against women through his own personal lens. And he said, "I have never been female, but I have been black my whole life. What is the blood on the tracks that I happen to survive that others did not, simply because of the forces of society that prevent it at every turn? So my life experience tells me that when you do not find blacks in the sciences, when you do not find women in the sciences, I know that these forces are real, and I had to survive them to get where I am today. So before we start talking about genetic differences, you have got to come up with a system where there is equal opportunity. Then we can have that conversation." So that's what science needs. We need equal opportunity for men and women. And feminism is about equality. It's not about the superiority of women, although I personally believe that women are a lot better at many things than I am. I would be lost without my wife, I'll be honest. Like, I am all about the science, she's about the organization. I wouldn't even be here on time without her, so thank you very much. I'm just sucking up to her, so. No, but like the thing about the bias in STEM too is, like, the heartbreaking part of it is not even limited just to men. Studies have shown that papers are more likely to get published by female scientists if they use their initials instead of their first name, and that's been among male peer reviews and female peer reviews and mixed peer reviews, which is heartbreaking that that has to be the case. But for the same reason is why Harry Potter had to be published under the name J.K. Rowling, because they didn't think that a magical boy wizard story could be published by a woman. So this is in every field. And just the fact that it's in STEM is terrible, because science is about the rigorous discussion and exploration of knowledge from a variety of broad perspectives. And we cannot have a variety of broad perspectives if half the population's voice is discounted. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I interviewed a PhD instructor at Boise State a few years ago. She has since moved on to another school for some of the reasons that I'm about to talk about. But she said that when she was in meetings with the rest of her department in material science, is that people would listen to what the women scientists had to say and then kind of just politely disregard them and ask what the men thought. And that's the kind of thing that is unfortunate about science, is that even people that don't want there to be a bias in science have one by accident. And the only way that that's going to change is if we talk about it. Men and women together, we have to talk about how everybody's voice needs to be heard, especially when it comes to the advancement of human knowledge in biomedical science. And that's why it's so important for everybody to think to themselves, if there's somebody speaking about an idea and you find yourself letting your mind just like wash away and disregard them, take a moment then and ask yourself, what's going on there, and why am I doing that, and why am I feeling like this person shouldn't have an opportunity to speak right now? And I see that happen even in the classes that I teach. I teach a physics lab at Boise State, and I noticed that we have one woman in my class, and in her group, every week since the start of the semester, she has been in the recorder role, the secretary role. And I asked her just this last Thursday, I was like, do you want to be in this role every time? Do you want to like get hands-on with the equipment? And she's like, yeah, I do. I'm like, well then, why aren't you? And like the two men that were in the group with her were just like, huh, like they didn't even mean to do it. They didn't even realize they were doing it. But next week, she's going to be hands-on getting in there. And that's because I took a moment to ask what's going on. And I want to make sure that I keep doing that, and I have to be vigilant about it because even I am susceptible to it. And I, of all people, do not want to be, because it's for the sake of all the mothers that are in blue-collar fields and all the female comedians struggling to just be funny in a world that is already against them. Everybody needs to let everybody have an equal opportunity and not just say that there is a difference in our chromosomes, because we wouldn't even know what was going on in our chromosomes if it wasn't for Rosalind Franklin. Yeah. All right, thank you guys very much for letting me talk today.